Welcome to the Pursuit of Wellbeing. My name's Maria Brosnan. I'm the founder of Pursuit and your host for the show. We're dedicated to providing wellbeing information, inspiration and support for teachers, leaders and school staff around the world. My guest today is Mal Krishnasamy. Mal is an educational consultant and coach. With almost 20 years experience in education as a teacher, middle leader, then senior assistant principal across a multi-academy trust, she's seen it all. Mal's in a unique position of understanding the strengths of teachers, the pressures they're under, and the struggles between wanting to stay or leave the profession. Mal set up Mal CPD Education Consultancy and Coaching to share what she's learned to support others along their education journey. As a consultant, she provides one-to-one and team coaching, ILM-endorsed coaching skills training, which is the Institute of Leadership and Management endorsed coaching skills training, and assertive leadership development courses. She also supports whole school improvement through introducing and embedding a coaching culture to organisations. Mal, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
That's quite a lot going on there. It's a wonderful, wonderful set of skills. And I think that leads really nicely to talking about assertive leadership training. So let's just start there. Tell us, what do you mean by that? Why assertive? And
why assertive? What I've found as being a leader myself for many years, even pre-teaching, from coaching people, I found that there's lots of good people out there that are brought into leadership teams, but they're poor leaders, and they've been brought into leadership because they're great teachers. But a great teacher doesn't necessarily make a great leader. And they may be great in the classroom, but it's that people management skills. For some reason, they may be able to do that with children, but they struggle to do that, have that empathy and have that, be able to deal with different types of people as adults. And I think that is something that has come across really strongly for me in my career with other leaders, and which I feel has created issues, sometimes because people don't realise they are being quite toxic in the way that they're dealing with people. They're not being very empathetic, and they're not leading with humanity, really. The humanity in leadership, it has gone out the window for many schools, and part of that is because of the inexperience and the lack of training, because really what we need is, if you earmark someone for leadership, then they should be trained and coached and supported whilst they're aspiring, and then once they're in the role, they need to be coached and supported as well.
So getting back to the word assertive, so how does that feed in? And there was a couple of other words that came up, toxic being one of them, that I'll definitely circle back to. But just to help us understand what you mean by assertive in this particular scenario.
Yeah, it's interesting because I used to coordinate PSHE, and I found
just for our international listeners, PSHE is?
Personal Social Health Education.
Thank you.
And now across a secondary school, so 11 to 18-year-olds. And I found that whether you're 11 years old, 15 or 18, a key part of your, an important skill would be being assertive. Because if you can say no to drugs, you can say no to sex, you can say no to a whole range of different things. And I was training teachers and teaching assistants on how to train students. And every time I got them to show me in a role play, right, show me an assertive way of doing this, they'd show me aggressive or passive. And I'm like, okay, right, let's try that again. I think I had the assumption years ago that, people know what it is. And And then somebody else stand and go, oh, I know how to do this. And then they do it. And I'm like, actually, that's really aggressive.
Yes.
And so I found that every time I've done this with staff, and even recently this January, I did whole trust training with about 40 teaching assistants, and not one of them could show me assertive. And if they can't show me assertive, that they're being aggressive, that means they're being aggressive with children, they're being aggressive with other members of staff, or being too passive, and that's going to be detrimental to their own self-esteem. So that's why I started thinking about this assertive leadership course, because I thought, well, it's where assertiveness is where you can say what you want to say without being aggressive. You're able to hold people to account without being threatening or bullying. And what I found on this course, the people that are coming onto the course are people that, again, every single person that's been on my course are lovely people, but they haven't got the tools to be able to be assertive. They don't know how to hold that member of staff in their team that isn't pulling their weight, hold them to account. What words can they use? How can they tackle certain situations? And it's about difficult conversations as well, having difficult conversations without being aggressive. Yeah. Or absolutely. Walking away from it thinking, oh, it's too hard, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it sounds like there's a theme there around holding boundaries as well.
Yeah, definitely. Because, you know, when you've got many people who are quite passive in nature, their role models are who are leaders who are quite, let's say, a bit more in your face in the way that they deal with things. But that's not your style. You don't know how to deal with difficult situations. So if a member of staff goes over a boundary that you feel isn't right, then because of your passive nature and you haven't got the tools, you don't tackle it. And because you don't tackle it, that member of staff will keep going. They'll keep doing what they're doing because they haven't been tackled. And it may be just a case of one person once just says, look, that's upsetting me, so that needs to stop. And that's not aggressive. That's just stating how I feel rather than you are doing this, you know, which is much more aggressive.
Yeah. And so do you have a definition, or just so people who might be listening to this saying, I can totally relate to what Mel's saying, what are some quick wins? What are some ways that people can kind of up their assertiveness without becoming aggressive? Because I think that's a real fear for many people, that they genuinely are good people and they don't want to upset people, but that can create can create trouble, lack of clarity, lack of
I think
leadership.
I think it's several things. If you want, you can have a few tricks and, you know, but if you really want to embed assertiveness into who you are, then you need to be really self-aware. And what I mean by self-aware isn't just, oh, who am I? You know, the existential way of thinking about it. It's more about knowing yourself in terms of how emotionally intelligent am I? What kind of key strengths do I have? What are my limitations? What am I going to do about those limitations? It's not always about working on those limitations, about getting other people to help you as well as finding other resources. But a key part of what I do is get people to think about their own personal values. And because I believe if you know your values, you know what you're fighting for, you know what your boundaries are. And so when it comes to a point where something has happened and you feel, actually, that's not right, it feels like it's not right, then you can go through your values and go, that's why it's not right. quite often a lot of people that I'm working with, they have this gut feeling that it just doesn't feel right, but they can't put it into words. Yeah. And I think if you know your values, you know what you're fighting for, and making decisions is a lot easier.
And how would you define values for somebody who's listening to this saying, how do I even know what my values are? How do you help people discover them?
Values are, they're very personal, and it's things that are so important to you. It's kind of like, well, I see it as do or die, but I'm quite I suppose I am a bit more in your face like that. I'm quite like bold. I don't do pastel, you know, I'm not wishy-washy kind of thing. So for me, it's do or die. Without this, I would rather die than not have this in my life.
And give me some examples of what that might be.
Freedom and independence. My key values are freedom, independence, authenticity, integrity. If I can't be me, then I feel like I'm in a straitjacket and I can't function. Yeah. You know, so I can't be in that situation. Yeah. So, for example, in my last school, the values of the school, I realized that the values of the school didn't match my own. And so it was time for me to move on. It's impossible for me to work in a school where the values don't match my own.
And how could you give us some examples of what those values were? That I find that really intriguing in education across the school. You'd think all the values would be the same, but they're really not, and they can vary enormously across schools that I go to or I work with. It's like, oh my gosh, wow, really?
So one school I worked with, the values matched my own, and I was part of that system where we created a key part of our values was diversity, inclusion. Every child mattered. We rarely excluded children. It was only extreme cases because we were there for those kids and because they had difficult home lives. The last school I worked at, that sense of caring wasn't there. And it was more a case of, what looks good for Ofsted. It was about tick boxing rather than what's best for our community. So that didn't fit with my values of what school should be about.
Right, yeah. And that circles back nicely then to what poor leadership can do in a school and what that can do to create a toxic environment. Can you tell me more? Let's just define what you mean by a toxic culture.
Toxic culture. It's such a minefield.
It is.
I mean, right. People can have bad days at work, but a toxic culture is where it seeps into your skin and into your heart and into your soul, and it makes you miserable. And there's a culture of bullying amongst staff, amongst certain leaders, and it permeates throughout the school. So they create this culture of lack of empathy, lack of humanity, a lack of caring. And it's more judgmental and evaluating everything you do, where you have to constantly prove that you're a professional and know what you're doing, rather than supportive and developmental. So that's what I call toxic, because that sort of thing, it's going to affect people's well-being. If you're constantly judged all the time and you have to constantly prove, that's not a way to, we spend so much time at work, and teachers especially, so much time working. And if all that time you're constantly trying to prove, even when I'm marking a book, I need to show this, that's not good for your mental health.
And what would you say to somebody who's in that position? Because I think if we're talking about leadership here, we're definitely not talking about senior leadership only, because I'm thinking even of schools I've worked with where newly qualified teachers have a leadership role over the support staff in their room with their class, and struggle with that because they're trying to find their way around a new system, into a new career, and have to manage another member of staff in their classroom who's typically older than them, more experienced than them, and they have to lead that, and they lead in that situation, and it can be extremely challenging for them to do that. So
yeah, absolutely.
So we're talking leadership skills start with the first day of teaching.
Yes.
And then progress all the way through your teaching career. So how
it's relationship skills. It's being able to have those conversations. Quite often what you'll find, I mean, I remember this when I was an NQT, where the teaching assistant, instead of letting me do the behaviour management, and she'd do it, but it'd be sort of the aggressive yelling across the classroom at some kid. I'm like, that's not helpful. So I had to have a conversation with her and say, look, I'd really appreciate you trying to help, but actually it's actually quite undermining for me. And what I would prefer is if you could work with those specific students, and if so-and-so kicks off, then I deal with them, if that's okay, like that. So it's having that concept rather than going, look, sort it out. You're shouting in my classroom, it's my classroom, and being all territorial and power about it. It's like, this is what I prefer. What do you think? Or, having that conversation.
Or what I see much more often is not saying anything.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm really impressed as an NQT, you were able to speak with your teaching assistant or the support staff and say, can we try it this way, please? This is how, that takes a lot of courage to do that. And I'm curious to know where you learned that skill. Was that just part of your nature?
Well, I was an NQT age 29. Okay. I think that helped. Yeah. Okay. And previous to teaching, I managed large bookmakers. So I was dealing with difficult characters on a daily basis. And you couldn't kick off. They'd kick off. And if you kicked off as well, what kind of message is that giving everybody? So I found a way to kind of deal with difficult characters in a more assertive way rather than aggressive or just passive, letting them get on with it, where they end up ruling, the shop. So I suppose I learned it there.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense.
But also I'm the fourth of 4 children, and I think I think that really does help, being the fourth. I mean, my eldest son, he and I are very similar characters, incredibly similar, but I've got more fight in me because I was the youngest, of 4, whereas with him we're trying to coach him to be more assertive.
Yeah, I think that it makes a huge difference. I'm number 6 out of 7 children, so that I have a different way of operating as well. Yeah. But you certainly pick up a lot in other aspects of your life, that's for sure. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, for people that are listening to this feeling like, oh my God, how do I do this? How do I have these conversations without upsetting people? What would be your first piece of advice that you'd give to somebody that just doesn't want to hurt somebody else's feelings?
Yeah. First of all, in a school situation, you need to think about, usually, quite often, a lot of the conversations are because the children are suffering. And if your ultimate goal is to make sure that the children benefit, then that's what you need to keep in your mind, that this isn't about upsetting people. The end goal, every conversation needs to have a purpose, and the end goal is not to upset somebody, it's to ensure the children get what's best for them. And so that's talking from your values. That in itself is absolutely key. So that in itself may give you the drive to go and have that conversation. I'm doing this for the children, not for me, not for that member of staff, like that. Secondly, it's thinking about how your body language is really important. So quite often with secondary school children that I used to teach, they were all taller than me. I'm only 5'1", so they were all taller than me. So, but standing in front of them and giving them a rollicking, it's never going to work because it's just looking at them kind of thing. But also it's very aggressive standing in front of somebody like that. So I learned this a long time. It was actually Assertive Discipline many, many years ago, 20 years ago as an NQT. It was a thing going round. And we had whole staff training on assertive discipline techniques. And the trainer said to us, stand to the side. Stand to the side of the student and speak to them. And that immediately, it's calming. And that's the same with adults, that if you kind of sit 10 to 2, like you do with coaching, as though you're in a cafe, rather than how we are, as though there's a table between us, it's less hierarchical. So it's like you're having a chat. So before you even say a word, you're thinking about why you're having this conversation and how you're going to have this conversation. And I'd have a script as well, so that you don't deviate and get emotional. Or write it all down with all the emotions and then take all the emotion out of it. And that sounds a bit, well, that's not very human, is it? But actually, quite often the emotions are what make it aggressive. The emotions, it's you're always late, it's so rude, you don't respect me, and you, that kind of thing. Whereas if you think, okay, I need to think about I need to name the issue. So they're always late. I need to talk about the consequence of that. Because of that, I have to wait. How does that make me feel? Well, I feel frustrated and not valued. So then you put it together. When you arrive late, it means that I have to wait and I get frustrated and I feel not very valued or respected. And you need to make sure that the tone of how you say it is really important. Because if you go, when you arrive late, and the person's like, whoa, kind of thing. Yeah. So it's like when you arrive, you have to be calm. So never have this conversation. I do this with my other half. Never have this conversation. Let's talk about this later. Right? Okay. Right?
It's a life skill.
It is. You know, we're like, let's not talk about this now. It's a good point, because we're both getting like that. So just do it when you're calm. And you know you're going to have a more calm conversation, because if you've got heightened emotions up here, that's going to come out in some way, especially if something's been going on for a while and you've been putting off having this conversation, which we all do. So it's talking about having that calm, nice body language that's not sort of in front of them, calm tone, and talking about making as many I statements as possible. And when that happens, it's actually quite surprising, because whereas in the past it'd be like, you're so rude, you're always late, you're bang out of order, saying all that, the other person switched off. All they're getting is rah, rah. It becomes white noise. So, and then they get annoyed, and then why should they change anything? Yeah? But if you're going, look, let's have a chat, because something's bugging me, I need to talk to you about this. When you arrive late and blah, 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 and you say your sentence, they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. They can't help but be sorry, because they've made you feel not very valued. I do respect you. And I was like, okay, so what can we do about this next? The important thing is pausing and allowing them to talk. And that way you've still got a relationship. What many people worry about is that EastEnders mentality, which is like, if you have that difficult conversation, you're going to be found under a patio somewhere. Somebody's going to die, somebody's going to get killed, or it's going to turn into a major row and the whole street's going to be involved. It's that kind of full on. I think people have that catastrophizing thought about a little conversation and they make it bigger than it actually is, which when you're not used to having that sort of conversation, it's understandable. Yeah. But once you've got the tools, it's much easier. And I found that people who have been on my course have messaged me and said, oh, I finally had that really difficult conversation I talked to you about. Oh my God, it was so liberating, and they're doing what I want them to do now. And yeah, we've got a really good relationship now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I do very similar training in schools, and I concur with everything you've just said, and the results and what that feeds into in terms of creating a healthy, thriving school culture.
Yeah.
We just can't understate that. Being
Yeah.
able to, because then just is feedback. It's how we communicate with each other.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be confrontational,
Exactly.
aggressive, or passive, that we just kind of, oh, well, this is just the way it is. That we assert ourselves. And that word is strong, because even as I say it, I think, yeah, it's a great word, because it's not the aggressive kind of plowing into somebody. It's like, okay, let's name this, let's talk about this, let's sort this out. And as you say, for the benefit of all of the children in this school.
Yeah.
And
it's
ultimately
win-win.
That's what we're all here for.
Yeah. Assertiveness, having assertive conversations is win-win for everybody. Whereas aggressive is win-lose, for somebody loses. And same with passiveness, somebody loses. And that's what you need to think. What is the purpose of this conversation I'm having? Am I having this conversation to win something, or is it so that both of us can get something out of this?
Yeah, perfect. And ultimately the students, and I think for many people that I've worked with that feel anxious about being more assertive or standing up for themselves or boundaries, when you just help them reframe that into, we're doing this for the benefit of the children, it really, there's a big shift happens there. Yeah.
That's always been a huge part of my leadership. And whenever I introduced a new topic or introduced a new policy within schools, the first thing I'd talk about is why. Why do we need this? How is this going to benefit the children? So this isn't about Ofsted or tick boxing or anything like that. This is about, how is this going to reduce your workload and benefit the children? And then people are in. You've got buy-in.
Yeah, for sure. And that leads into accountability as well, because is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of holding people to account?
Yeah, I think that's what many leaders find the most difficult thing. And because of that, the children ultimately suffer. And that's what people need to be thinking, is that actually, if I don't tackle this member of staff, and even that language, tackle, that maybe is quite aggressive, isn't it? If I don't speak
under the patio soon.
Yeah. You know, it's just the language we have around having conversations. It's a normal conversation. We're in a workplace. We all need to work together to meet the goal, which is the children to thrive and to do well. And it's about, okay, there's many people that are people pleasers, and they don't want to upset the people that they need to hold to account. And then they feel like they're in a rock and a hard place because they don't want to do that. And then they don't want to upset their leaders, their managers. And so it's kind of, how do I do this? You know, and and it's basically what I've said. It's having those techniques of how to have those conversations, really. Yeah.
Clear boundaries, clear lines of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep talking. And that's the thing, because quite often it's a case of, as an NQT, stay away from the moaning minis in the class, in the staff room. Stay away. They're dementors sucking all the joy. Right? Stay well away from them. But as a leader, go to them, talk to them. And that's the best thing I ever did as a leader, because it made sure that, because if anyone's going to be opposing anything, it's going to be them. But you need to get them on side. You need to support them, help them, develop them as well. They're used to not being heard. So it's thinking about that. It's understanding different types of people and how they deal with change. because different people deal with it. Some people thrive on change, other people collapse. They just can't deal with it, and they get incredibly stressed. And when they're incredibly stressed, they're probably more aggressive, or may even go into their own shell. So it's okay, what do I need to do to support them? And that's part of assertive leadership as well, is that emotional intelligence to have an idea of, is to read the room, is to feel, okay, not everyone is going to feel the same way that I do. And quite often you hear that from leaders, that, well, I did it, why can't they do it? Well, everybody's different and they've got 4 kids at home. So it's thinking about, everybody has different circumstances. So a large part of what I do with leaders and when I'm coaching is empathy skills, is understanding different types of people, how they deal with change, how they deal with stress, and how to support them.
Yeah, and we're talking at a very specific time in our lives, and when there is change happening at every level, in school and outside of school, in politics, in every area of our life. And so people are having to deal with a lot.
And it creates anxiety. I mean, change creates anxiety, even if you like change. I mean, I've always quite liked change, but even if you like change, this level of change is too much, because none of it is in your control. And quite often, teachers are control freaks. We're perfectionists, we're control freaks. And there is no control because everybody else is making these decisions, and you just have to, the government's doing stuff that affects you directly. So it's that's not normal in normal times, not directly, occasionally, or maybe the latest budget or something, get a few pence off your pint on a Saturday night. But this is directly affecting your life. Yeah. So at work as well. So that is going to create anxiety.
And how would you recommend people deal with that at this time? And I think you alluded to something there in terms of control. How do we relinquish some of that feeling of that we need to control things when we just can't? There's so many things we can't control.
I think it's letting it go. It's really hard. It is hard. I mean, it's easy for me to say, let it go, because I'm a control freak as well. And I did find lockdown very difficult, and I'm a planner, and most teachers are, because you go by the bell. You like going, it's what you do. You've been doing it for 20 odd years, going by the bell and going. My partner and I, former teachers, we still split our year into the school term. So it's just the way that you work. But I forgot what I was saying now.
We're talking about that's fine. We're talking about control and what to do when we can't control.
And it's and I did find it difficult because I like planning ahead and thinking, Christmas we're going to do this and this, but you can't do that right now. You can't even plan next week. So it's kind of what's the levels going to happen. But it's important there's a couple of diagrams out there about control. And particularly to do with COVID, where it's thinking about, what can I control? Well, I can control what's happening inside my house. I can hopefully control my own children. I can control the shopping, hopefully. Again, it's really hard, isn't it? Because even the shopping, I'm going for the shopping and it's going back to, I couldn't get any toilet paper on the online shopping. And you're like, come on, people. But you have to stick to what you can control. And think, okay, I can't control that. I need to leave that until somebody tells me what to do. It's difficult, but it is something that everybody needs to do right now.
Otherwise it can cause us terrible levels of stress and anxiety, trying to do something about things that we just can't affect. And I find the more that I work within Do you know the Stephen Covey model of the circle of concern, where you have all of it? Imagine, for the people, some people who might not be familiar with, imagine 3 circles on a piece of paper, and in the circle of concern, think about all of the things that you're concerned about, and that could be everything from, you know, the presidential election, or climate change, or lockdown, or what's happening with your family, etc. Then within that is your circle of influence. So of all of these things that I'm concerned about, which of those can I influence? And many of them you can, but many of them you can't influence. And then what in the center, what can I control? And, you know, you can control what you eat, how much you sleep, if you exercise. There's lots of things we can control. So the more we operate within what we can influence and what we control, then the more our influence grows. That's when we can be good leaders and strong leaders. Even as a newly qualified teacher, there's a strength to that. But when we're out here thinking about all of the things that we're worried about, that we can't control, that we're concerned about, that's when we really struggle. So that's and we have to be able to let that go. And I know it sounds easy to say, hard to do, but there's no option. There's no option. Thank you, Mal. I've been speaking with Mal Krishnasamy. Her website is malcpd.com, where you can find out more about her assertive leadership coaching courses and many other things. She's got some lovely freebies on there as well, so make sure you check it out. And you can connect with Mal on Twitter at malcpd. Anywhere else where people could find you, or is that enough?
Probably Facebook and Instagram, but I rarely use those. I'm actually trying to reduce my social media use. So Twitter and LinkedIn, that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Great. Well, I'll make sure all of these links are in the show notes. Mal, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for watching. Check out our website, pursuitwellbeing.com, for information about our 5-step wellbeing action plan for teachers and school leaders. There's a link in the description below. Or take our free Teacher Anxiety Quiz at teacheranxietyquiz.com. The quiz only takes a couple of minutes, and you'll get a better understanding of where you are today, plus tips to immediately feel better. I'd love you to connect with me on Twitter at Maria Brosnan. And if you enjoyed the show, please hit the subscribe button. If you feel inspired, give us a thumbs up, comment, and share it with your friends.